Coming up in this week's Torah Pearls.
How many quail would it take to cover in every direction around the camp a day's journey in distance and 2 cubits deep?
Israel finds herself in the wilderness of Paran. But from which direction?
What about vain repetitions in prayer? We know that Jesus said that you shouldn't do that. Gentile pagans do it. Did Moses know that same idea?
So for the last time, what exactly is Moses' father-in-law's name?
Hey, would the meekest man in all the earth write and call himself the meekest man in all the earth?
The water of purification, where does it come from and what's in it?
All right, Jono, let's jump in.
Let's go. G'day, dear viewers, and thank you for your company once again here on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2 letter u.org. I'm Jono Vandor, and joining me from the Horeb Institute in Louisiana is the author of the Moses Scroll, Ross Nichols. G'day, mate.
Hello, Jono. How are you, my friend?
Doing very well, thank you, my friend. It is, of course, Season 3 of Torah Pearls, brought to you by Tanakh Tours. That's TANAKH, TanakhTours.com. And this week, we are in Torah portion Beha'alotecha. That's where we are, Ross.
That's
and that
it.
Off in Numbers chapter 8, and we finally will be done. Well, not entirely done, but we're going to get out of this big chunk of priestly material in this Torah portion. We'll let you know when that happens. And so to kick us off, I think Ezra, our AI critical scholar, is there. Give us a summary of Beha'alotecha from a critical scholar's perspective.
Behalotecha is where the wilderness journey really starts to pick up pace, literally and theologically. From an academic lens, this portion reflects several layers of priestly and non-priestly sources stitched together. We see the elevation of the menorah, purification of the Levites, and the second Passover, each rooted in ritual legislation with a clear priestly hand. But then the narrative shifts dramatically. Israel sets out from Sinai, and chaos follows. You've got complaints about food, prophetic challenges to Moses' leadership, and divine judgment, all classic hallmarks of the older Yahweh source. The 70 Elders episode may be an ideological explanation for shared leadership, and the quail incident likely a polemic against Israel's craving for Egypt's luxuries. Miriam and Aaron's critique of Moses is especially interesting text critically. It points to an early tradition of prophetic rivalry and possibly even older conceptions of Moses' marital history. So, Beha'alotecha isn't just about travel logistics. It's a theological crisis on the move.
A theological crisis on the move, Jono.
Help me out here, Ross. Etiological explanation for shared leadership. That is a word outside of my vocabulary. Let's find out what that means.
Well, I tell you what, I think I could give a definition, but if we're going to take the time, let's say Ezra, get Ezra to make that a little bit more clear for us.
In biblical scholarship, an etiological story is one that explains the origin or cause of a custom, name, practice, or natural phenomenon. Think of it like ancient Israel's version of a how this came to be story. For example, when the text says the 70 elders received some of Moses' spirit, it's likely offering an origin tale for shared leadership or the prophetic office beyond just Moses. It's not so much concerned with historical accuracy as it is with giving theological or institutional grounding to something that already existed by the time the story was written down.
All right.
By the way, yeah, we'll get into that a little bit because there's several different stories, really, on how that leadership goes. You know, how does it get from Moses to others? So
right, the delegation. We will be there. We'll be there soon enough. Thank you, Ezra, for that, and I will familiarize myself with that word. Chapter 8 is where we are, Ross, and it does kick off like this: the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you mount the lamps." And here we are with the menorah, I guess. Let the 7 lamps give light in front of the lampstand. So this is what he did. Now, we have had references to the menorah a number of times, the lampstand in Exodus, I think 5 times or so. What is this? Chapter 25, 27, 30, 37, 40. And also Leviticus chapter 24. Remember, that was the one after Leviticus chapter 23, strangely enough, where we have
Yeah.
the feast days, the hags, the sacred days, and the rabbis sometimes like to say, "Oh, look, here at the beginning of chapter 24 is a hint of Hanukkah, right? A shadow, a type, if you like." But all of these are P, I think, except for chapter 27, which Baden attributes to the redactor. But this is all P. And so here we are finally where it is actually set up. Everything else before this is like, don't forget to do this. We got to do this with the menorah. And now, am I to understand that Aaron's actually doing it now?
Gotcha.
Is that the way you understand it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a lot of these stories, I did a class on this last week. A lot of these stories sort of pull together. Like we assume when we get to Numbers, it's something totally different. But where does this actually fit in the rest of the Pentateuch, especially if we consider that we have different narratives or different story blocks that really go together? So I think your question is, does Beha'alotecha and the kicking off with the lamps, does it really slot in one of these earlier versions of priestly material that talks about the lamp? And I think the answer to that is yes, as we're going to see from other points that I have highlighted too.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Quite. Okay, good. So from that is, okay, so that's lampstand. And then from verse 5, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, take the Levites from among
Wait.
Israelites
Let me ask you.
okay.
Sorry, I forgot. I have in my notes just to ask you a couple of things about the lampstand. And I think we've covered this in previous, but just refresh my memory. The one that is in the old city on display,
yes,
it's everybody that goes to Jerusalem, and we take all the tours when we walk through the old city. Everyone sees this big giant menorah. Is that the one? It's not the one that's going to be in the coming third temple, as some people say, right?
That is, I have heard that. I have heard that that they intend to use that, and there is some discussion about that because the one that we see in the old city is modeled of what we see in the Ark of Titus when you see the Roman soldiers carrying away the treasure of the Romans. But and people say, well, where is that? Is it in the Vatican? Right? There's this great conspiracy theory about it being in the Vatican. Give it back. But the thing about that, Ross, is that that's not the original either. What we see there perhaps is a depiction in the Ark of Titus of the one that's carried away, which is the Hashmonean replica. Because remember, after Antiochus Epiphanes, right? So they had to make all new stuff because he came and stole it all, the Maccabees and so on and so forth. So they had to make new stuff and then dedicate the temple. And it would appear that when they made the new stuff, they made it a little bigger, a little grander, and so on and so forth. But what we know when it comes to the menorah is that it should be pure gold, and we know that pure gold is a soft metal, so it can't be too big because it will just bend under its own weight if it's too big. What we see, coming back to your example in the Old City, is a timber menorah that is laid over with gold.
And it's supposed to be of one solid piece, if I'm not mistaken.
One solid piece. So to be much smaller, The
only other thing that I had on the menorah is that there is this interesting story. We won't have to get into it, but in Zechariah 4 of this menorah, and on either side of the menorah, it's part of a vision that's shown to Zechariah. And he's asked, do you know what these are? And on the two sides are what is defined ultimately as the two sons of the oil. Some translations, I looked at the NRSV today, and it says the two anointed ones which stand beside the Lord of all the earth. So I don't want to go down this trail necessarily, but it's an interesting passage. You remember Zechariah 4 it's an attempt to bring back restoration under Zerubbabel and so forth, and there's all this stuff about not by power, not by might, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. And anyway, you remember, it's just all this interesting stuff, and some people have used this passage to define or to interject the idea of two messiahs. Judaism ultimately came up with two messiahs, not one, but two.
Yeah.
So you have the two sons of fresh oil, And some people go, oh, it means the Messiah. So you have two Messiahs, and the Lord is in the middle, like Hashem, God, and then Messiahs on either side, doing his bidding. It's outside the scope of what we're talking about tonight, maybe, but it just, every time I see a passage about the menorah,
it reminds you of this prophecy.
Yeah, it goes to this prophecy. Very interesting.
Yeah, it is curious, I have to say. Something else that is curious for us is that, yes, here we are. The Lord is saying to Moses, got to clean the Levites, give them a bath. It's not really a bath, though, because what it is...
Shave and a haircut.
Shave and a haircut, but it's even more than that. This is what you shall do to them to cleanse them. You will sprinkle on them the water of purification. The what, Ross? What is this?
The water, my ASV has the water of expiation upon them.
That's right. Now, there is different. Now, is this sometimes it's called Hamayim Kadosh, the water of separation, or the water of holy water, or it's called the water of Nidar, right? The Hamayim Nidar, or it is the water of purification. It's referring to the same stuff, at least my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong. What is it? Well, we don't find out until we get to Numbers chapter 19, Ross. We will go into great detail when we get there. But just to let people know, this magical concoction, we've already used it in our favorite chapters. That is, of course, Leviticus chapter 14, chapter 5, and chapter 50. And this is, you remember when you get two pigeons and you've got to, pinch off one of the heads and squeeze its blood out into a bowl that has the water of purification, or I think it's called the holy water there, and get the other pigeon, dip it in there and give it a bit, off it goes. And so, Leviticus chapter 14. And then last week when we were talking about the spirit of jealousy, right? You have to make a man with the spirit of jealousy is going to take his wife to the priest, is going to make her drink this filthy water. And this filthy water is not just this water of purification, but as we mentioned last week, it's going to have some of the dirt of the tabernacle in there. It's going to have, you're going to put the cowhide in there and sort of dissolve the letters on that scroll, and then you're going to make her drink it. Well, what is in the water of purification before even that happens to it? Well, if we go, Ross, to Numbers chapter 19, verse 5, and again, is it next week? I don't know. We're going to get there anyway.
Well, it's coming up. Yeah, it's in the next couple. Yeah.
It's coming up. It is the cow. You got to get the red cow, and you're going to burn the whole thing. It's blood and it's dung. Everything. Oh, yeah. Got to burn it. Burn it until it's ashes. But you have to add also a few magical ingredients, and that is cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson stuff, or scarlet, or wool. It's probably a dyed red wool, whatever it is. Got to throw that stuff in there, let that burn as well. Now it's ready. Get some of that ash, put it in the water. Then, in the case of our poor, the poor woman whose husband has a spirit of jealousy, add some dirt, put some ink, and drink this, and so on and so forth. Okay, we talked about that last. But that is what's in, and this is what is being used to cleanse the Levites. Now, you mentioned got to get a haircut. In fact, you got to shave everything, I think. Yeah. Is that right? Okay.
That's what it looks like. Pass a razor.
Pass a razor over your body and wash your clothes. Now, this magical combination of the cedarwood, the hyssop, and the scarlet, we also see that in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 4, verses 6, verse 49, 51, and 52, right? And lo and behold, shave the body and wash the clothes. We also see that in Leviticus chapter 14, verses 8 and 9. Methinks that the scribe who wrote this probably has something to do with Leviticus 14 as well. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's very certainly priestly. If it's anything, anyone who spends any time in here says this is part of a priestly body of literature. So, in fact, I'm surprised, man. You've got a lot on chapter 8. I felt there was so much in the others. I thought, man, we'll touch the lamp and then move.
No, there actually is. We got to keep moving pretty fast. But I do have, just to revisit this once again, and we talked about this last time, I think. But in chapter 8, verse 16 to 18, it says, "For they are the Levites are formerly assigned to me from among the Israelites. I have taken them for myself in place of the first issue of the womb. All the firstborn of the Israelites, for every firstborn among the Israelites, man as well as beast, Ross, is mine. I consecrate them to myself at the time that I smote every firstborn in the land of Egypt." Right? So this is what I was talking about. And so verse 18, so take the Levites instead of every firstborn of the Israelites. All right. So again, we see that being a firstborn, there is a potential or a perpetual threat. You're the firstborn, you better be ransomed. And if you are the firstborn animal, you better be ransomed. There needs to be a sacrificial substitute or a payment made. As we mentioned a number of times, if it's a donkey, you better substitute it with a lamb. And if you don't, then you've got to break the donkey's neck. In actual fact, the Young's literal translation, Ross, says you have to sever the head, cut off the head, which of course is breaking the neck. But and we're to understand from the book of Numbers that this is all divine information. But this takes us back to, what is it? Leviticus chapter 3, Numbers chapter 3, verse 39 to 51, where it tells us, Ross, just to do this very quickly, it tells us that they did a census of the Levites, and they were exactly 22,000.
This is all up your alley. The reason you're doing this is because of your Levitical background. You had to memorize all this stuff as an infant.
That's exactly right. You remember we said that all of the census, it was highly questionable. One of the reasons for that is because they all ended in rounded to the 100.
Right.
But we're to understand that they're not rounded, they're actually accurate. And what it says here is in verse 39, all the Levites who were recorded from the Lord, this is 339, with the Lord's command, Moses and Aaron recorded by their clans, all the males from the age of 1 month and up came exactly to 22,000, Ross. And then the Lord said, hey, record every firstborn male. So they did that. And when they counted all the firstborn males, well, all of a sudden we're even more specific. All the other numbers in the census are rounded to the 100, but here we are with the firstborn males, 22,273. That's the only number that comes out odd like that. And what happens is they deduct the amount of Levites from that number, and they end up with 273. 273 firstborns that have to be redeemed with, 5 shekels? Yeah, 5 shekels per head. Which of the 22,273, which of the 273 have to pay and which of them do not?
I hate word problems.
We don't know. I don't. There's not an answer to that.
Okay. All right.
That's a rhetorical question.
Okay.
But apparently, 273. Maybe they decide by lot. I don't know. But 273 have to pay. It's like, sorry, dude, we don't have any Levites to replace you, and if we don't ransom you, who knows what will happen to you? So they do pay, and that money is given to Aaron and his sons. There you go. But when we get to Numbers chapter 18, the ransom money for the firstborn, all of that has to be paid, and all of that goes to Aaron and his sons. It's a complex system, Ross, and it doesn't seem consistent. I don't know.
Yeah, and last week you touched on, we don't have to do it again, but you touched on the different ages for the ministry of the Levitical group, so you're like, well, what is it? I mean, which one is it?
That's right. And here, I think we're now at 25. So in chapter 3, I think it was 30. Here it's 25. And as we mentioned in the book of Ezra, it's dropped to 20. So, yeah.
Ezra gave a good reason for that, which I think might be worth people listening to if they missed last week's show. But that was an interesting proposal.
His reason was that perhaps the demand for Levites was greater, and so they had to pull them from a younger source, and so therefore 20. I can buy that, and I think I mentioned that. I think I said Ezra chapter 6 verse 62, but it's actually chapter 2 verse 62 that says that there were a bunch of Levites that said, "Hey, we're Levites," and they said, "Well, what are your fathers? What's your ancestry? Show us your family tree." And they said, "We don't have that." Well, you can't serve then. So there was a shortage of Levites. Okay, maybe that's the case. All right.
Maybe. Yeah.
Anything else in chapter 8, Ross?
No, not at all, man. You did an excellent job. That's good. That's good Levitical stuff there.
There's a bit of Levitical stuff. Now we are in chapter 9, and lo and behold, we are talking about, I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, but is this the only other Passover that was observed?
Before we go there, can I touch on one thing about chapter 9?
Please.
If you look at, and this is something that people have noted, I did a whole class on this on Shabbat, but everything's out of sequence. Like, we meet with dates in Numbers chapter 9, which are later in the story than Numbers chapter 1. And so what is interesting, and I'll post in the comments or in the description below, Seth made a chart, because what we see is if you look at the way it's recorded, it's all out of sync. Like in Numbers chapter 1, verse 1, it's year 2, month 2, day 1. I'm not going to go through all these because without the chart, it's difficult to follow. But if you look at Numbers chapter 9, verse 1, it's year 2, month 1, day 14.
Quite
so
right.
You're a month earlier. But look, that's only one of these. I gave 8 sequential dates, and we're going to see more of them in this particular Torah portion, that ought to make people say, wait a minute, why is it not in order? So, but to your point, okay, so we get to the Passover, and as you mentioned, this is the only Passover in the Pentateuch other than the one that kicks us off in the book of Exodus, right? And then we don't see another one until the book of Joshua. And then when's the next time we see one? This is what's really puzzling. We do see a second Passover, like Passover Sheni, in the book of 2 Chronicles 30,
right.
under Hezekiah. But the details don't match what's described here, because in Numbers chapter 9, it very specifically says the reasons that you can do this second Passover. And I would encourage people to look at 2 Chronicles 30 and see, does that fit? You know? Anyway, so I know that we probably don't have to go into the depth on that, but it's very, very interesting. Then, of course, by the time you get to Josiah's Passover says very interestingly in 2 Kings 23 and 2 Chronicles 35 that no Passover had been kept since the days of, one account says Joshua's days, another says Samuel's days. I mean, which one is it? I'm sorry, Samuel's days are the days of the judges. But still, that implies, and one writer in Kings even says, that no king had kept the Passover. So it makes me wonder, when did this Passover celebration, at least as it later evolved, how was that? I don't think it was something that could be traced back to the Exodus. Clearly, it's not kept, and that might make people feel better, is to not say the former, but to say it like this. It certainly wasn't kept in biblical times. Absolutely not. And how do I know that? Because the biblical text tells me that.
Yeah. All right. Good. From verse 15 in chapter 9. Oh, hang on. No, that's good. Okay. On the day that the tabernacle was set up, Ross, the magic cloud, covered the tabernacle, the tent of the pact, and in the evening it rested over the tabernacle in the likeness of fire until morning.
By the way, just a quick interjection. Do we know what day the tabernacle was set up? We absolutely do. We have a date for that. And we see it's year 2. Let's see, year 2, month 1, day 1. So again, we've got another sequential problem here, right?
Do you have this list that Seth has made up? Is it linked in description? Because I haven't seen
absolutely.
it. Absolutely.
Yeah. And people who missed that class, check it out, because it's quite interesting. You have to. people read that phrase on the day that the tabernacle was set up, but they don't put a date to it, whereas Exodus chapter 40 and verse 1 and verse 17 gives us a very clear date. So if you know the date and then you go, wait a minute, so this is now going to a time prior to the Passover on the calendar, and you have to recognize that. Now, you may be getting to this, but let me just say that there's something else very interesting about this passage in Numbers chapter 9, verse 15 and following. And it says, on the day the tabernacle was reared up, it goes on, it talks about, so it was always, Jono, verse 16, anytime the cloud was taken up over the tent, after that the children of Israel journeyed, and it goes on and it describes a process that the children of Israel don't break camp until the cloud goes up and moves and stops again. And it goes to, it says it happens like this all the time.
Yep. Yeah, apparently all the time. And as it says in verse 23, on a sign from the Lord they made camp, and on a sign from the Lord they broke camp. So Jehovah is the one, by use of this sign of the cloud, to determine when they're going to move and when they're going to stop, right? This is what we take from verse 23. They observe the Lord's mandate and the Lord's bidding through Moses. Well, the thing I find interesting about that, I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit, is that at the end of chapter 10, it seems like Moses is commanding God, almost like he is a genie. He says, the Lord's, says from verse 34, and the Lord's cloud kept above them by day as they moved on from the camp. When the ark was set out, Moses would say, advance, O Lord. May your enemies be scattered and may your foes flee before you. And when it halted, he would say, return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. What do you think?
Couple of things. That is an excellent point. Good observation. Here's something else. You know that this tells the story of how the whole wilderness journey went, and they haven't moved one time yet. The children of Israel do not move until the 11th verse of chapter 10. In 10:11, the children of Israel, for the first time, we're not there yet, they break camp and they move, and like you said, one account says it's when the cloud moves, that's how you know. But that doesn't agree with Deuteronomy, nor does it agree with the Moses scroll. In Deuteronomy, remember, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 6, and in the Moses scroll, it says the following, and I'm paraphrasing, but it says, the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, you've been at this mountain long enough.
Long enough.
Or the Lord spoke unto me, saying, you've been here long enough. So did he hear a voice that says it's time to move, or did the cloud just go up? Or, some people might say, well, you're being quite picky there. Well, I'm just trying to, see what the text
it's absolutely
says.
fair. It's absolutely fair. And just where you're talking about there, we end up in the wilderness of Paran. You took me there for the first time, I do recall. We'll get there in just a minute. Before we go there, it's not enough to have shofars, Ross. Shofars aren't good enough. You need silver trumpets. You need two of them. A couple of silver trumpets. It's not enough to have the cloud tell you when to go and when to stop. You need silver trumpets to also let you know what sort of, if we have a meeting, if we have an intruder, if we're about to go, if we're about to, all this sort of stuff. But we
I
need
have
the
two silver trumpets here.
Do you really?
I do, at the building.
Go on, tell us about them.
From back in the day, I really, because I love this particular text, when you get into it and you're looking for ways to, like, say, the Day of Trumpets in English Bible translation. Really, we know that
Yom
that's
Teruah.
not, Yom Teruah, but you're trying to find, as a fundamentalist believer, you want to find something in the text about Yom Teruah.
True.
Well, I didn't know this at the time. It never dawned on me that it's never practiced in the Bible. No one ever knows about it. In the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, on the first day of the 7th month, they don't know anything about trumpets. And that you would think they would. They're reading the Bible.
Quite right.
But anyway, so be that as it may, you've tried to find ways to talk about trumpets or noises on Yom Teruah. And that's what you do. And this is one of those texts. And I remember I used to always say, now this isn't necessarily a shofar. This is talking about the silver trumpets. And so I bought 2 silver trumpets so that I could blow them and give people a taste of what it sounded like if you were in the camp.
Does it sound very different to a shofar?
Well, it depends on how good you are. I can make them sound quite different than a shofar. It does sound different. And so you have to wonder. But 10 reasons, I think, is the way that it's put. If you count that, is that right? It seems like I remember there are like 10 different ways or 10 reasons.
Oh, you might be right about that. I didn't count
10 results for the blowing. Right. Yeah, if you blow but one, right, then the princes, the heads are going. If you blow an alarm, the camp's on the east side. And when you blow an alarm the second time, the camp, so it's all these different things. And as I recall, there are 10 of these. So there's horns going off all the time. You just have to be able to recognize and know what those horns mean. That's right. 10 reasons.
Different the way that they blew. So in the second year on the 12th, so now we're in the 20th day on the second month, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle of the pact. This is verse 11. Verse 12, the Israelites set out from their journeys in the wilderness of Sinai. The cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran. So here's a question. From what direction? We don't know, do we?
No.
We don't know. Into the wilderness of Paran. I remember we first went for a drive, it was years ago. It must have been 2017, I think it was. And was it 2019? Might have been 20. Anyway, we drove all the way down there a few years back and had a look at that whole area. And I'd love to go back there. There's a few things that I want to see there now. But the question is, from which direction did they arrive in the wilderness of Paran, deep in the Arava? We don't know. It depends on where Sinai or Horeb is.
Exactly. And you and I have spent, and the Tylers and others of our friends have spent a lot of time looking at these texts, maps out in the desert on the top of a Jeep and, and thinking about these things because we just don't have enough information to chart some of these places. And that's why a lot of times on Bible maps, we see question marks, like, is this really this? I mean, we know regions, I think, with a decent amount of certainty, like Paran. We know this wilderness region. We know certain wildernesses. But again, if we don't know exactly where Horeb is or Sinai, how do we really know which direction? Must have been fairly close to go from there to there, but
I do wonder, and I don't know the answer to this question, but I wonder how long the tradition has been held of the current Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula, at St. Catherine's Monastery or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you know the answer to that question? I don't know.
Not off the top of my head, but people listening to us right now are going to be looking at the wiki, so maybe they'll type it in the notes for us. If I'm not mistaken, it's pretty early. It might be as early as the 6th century of the Common Era, or maybe even earlier. But I'm sure we'll see it in the notes.
It is an impressive peak, and if you want to make the story even more impressive, you're going to look for a larger, higher mountain with a more spectacular view, one more deserving of what you think the story should represent. And it is really just my speculation that Sinai is a separate mountain to Horeb. Horeb's not so. This one's better. Let's just make it. The Sinai's. Come on. And so they walked from here to Paran, which you can kind of make out. Who knows? We don't know, but I'm sure people have opinions. Put it in the comment section. People.
Absolutely.
Chapter 10, verses 14 to 27, Ross, we have another list of 12 tribes. We talked last week about the competing list of tribes, right?
Yeah.
In this case, the list does concur with the Moses Scroll, again, in different order. But we have Ephraim and Manasseh. We do not have Joseph inserted oddly or clumsily into it. And again, the Levites are sort of set apart from the tribes. So we do have 12 there. Any thoughts about this?
No, I tell you, it is interesting, though, that we have these different lists. I tell you, a good study is to horizontally, put these in different columns and look at these side by side, it's such a beneficial tool. I highly recommend that because some people might hear what you're saying and they go, I don't know. What the question becomes, why is it that some list leave out Joseph and list Ephraim and Manasseh and Levi, and some leave Levi out? And it's really remarkable when people, I think it makes a light bulb go off. So I encourage people to do that.
Yeah, most certainly. So
hey, what about verse 29?
29. We've already mentioned this, but it has to be because it's right here. Okay, so
let me read the note.
Go.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You say what you're going to say. I just want to read the note.
No, I was going to say Hobab is the son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. It so happens, Ross, that Moses has a few father-in-laws, and they all seem to be Midianites. One of them is Yitro. He married Yitro's daughter, Zipporah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So are we to understand that Zipporah is the daughter of another father-in-law? How does that work?
Well, the fundamentalist is going to say, no, Jono, you're being too picky, you're being pedantic. Listen, this guy just happens to have several names, just like you do. Some people call you Jono or Jonathan or, whatever.
Yep.
And that's what they would say, totally ignoring the possibility that we're talking about different sources who have different accounts. Listen to this note in the New Oxford Annotated. Ready?
Go.
The departure begins with a request for guidance between Moses and Hobab, his father-in-law. His father-in-law, okay. Note, it says, see Judges 4:11, which doesn't...
Hang on, Hobab is the father-in-law now?
Okay, so look at Judges 4:11, because you said the son of Reuel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. The son of? Hang on. Tell me what Judges...
Now, Heber, Heber, the Kenite, has separated from the other Kenites, descendants of Hobab, father-in-law of Moses. And this is like...
So confusing.
Isn't it, though?
Now,
what is this guy's name? Hang on. And it pitched... Oh, Elon. I didn't realize that Elon was a...
Elon's been around a while. He didn't just show up talking about going to Mars. He's been with us for a while.
Check out this guy's name. Wait. He pitched his tent at Elon Ananim. Elon Ananim, which is near Kadesh. We haven't got to Kadesh yet, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Go.
Yeah. All right. So Moses and Hobab, his father-in-law, if you believe Judges 4:11, named Jethro in Exodus 3:1, Exodus 4:18, and Exodus 18:1, named Reuel in Exodus 2:18 and Exodus 3:1, which Hobab apparently refuses. So what we have here is we have the many named father-in-law of Moses, and what I think this is, and I think it's fair to say, is a multiplication of sources which have different accounts about Hobab, Reuel, Jethro, Yitro. And the reason that I say that is because we have different accounts not only about will you go with us and lead us, we have other accounts of how much Jethro is involved. For instance, Jethro in Exodus chapter 18 gives a great bit of advice to Moses. What are you doing? And Rabbinic Judaism uses this to talk about how we have the authority. Yes, we do. We got authority. How about you? They talk about that this great thing came from Jethro, Reuel, Hobab, Jether. But what we find in Deuteronomy is that Moses doesn't say anything about Jethro, Reuel, Jether, Hobab. He says that it came another way altogether. So the burden of how does the leadership from Moses, how is that load dispersed? In all of these different stories, all of these different sources, Moses seems to be asking for help. And so you've got the Jethro story, you've got this story, We even have a story we're going to get to in a minute where God tells Moses, come up here and I'm going to take some of the spirit that's on you and give it to other people. So which one is it? Yeah. This is the question. It's called the burden of leadership.
The burden of leadership, the delegation of responsibility, if you like, or authority to alleviate Moses' burden. That's not the only thing which is I have noticed a couple of other things that I want to run by you, and it does actually have to do with the Moses scroll. Okay. And it's all in chapter 11. Before we get there, though, the way that chapter 11 kicks off, Ross, chapter 11, verse 1. Yes.
I'm sorry. Right before we go there, just let me mention that in 1035 through 1036, which you mentioned a moment ago, this Moses saying, rise up, Jehovah, and so forth, this is surrounded in the Masoretic text by inverted nuns, the letter nun. And the Masoretic text marks these off. Now, there are 85 letters between the inverted nuns. And the mystery is, what does that mean? Why is this quartered off like this? What is it? And there are lots and lots of different. There are lots and lots of different. Here's one. One. And this is from certain rabbinic understanding that these 85 letters, this small saying, is out of place. It is from somewhere else, and it has been recorded here, but it doesn't go naturally in this spot. But the scribes preserved it at this spot, and that this particular nun inverted is a sign for the reader who would get there, and they would go, oh, well, okay, what does that mean? Now, I don't know if that's true, but here's the thing. We've got inverted nuns in 9 passages in the Masoretic text.
Really?
And so the question becomes, what do they mean? Now, Rashi, one other quick thing, and I'm not going to, I don't remember the exact verse, but if you look up the article for inverted nun, there's a nice wiki on this one. And one of the comments there, which I'm researching right now because I found it interesting, is that Rashi reports another inverted nun in the Torah, in the Pentateuch. And the reason that this is interesting to me now is because currently in the Masoretic text, plural, that we have, that is not there. Whatever Rashi was looking at is not been preserved in the Masoretic text that we have. So I don't know. I'm just telling you here tonight that we need to look into this and see what happened to that one. What text was he using?
That is really fascinating. I don't know that I've heard that before. It sounds a little familiar, but I'm just not that familiar with that. I'm going to have to read about the inverted nun on the wiki. You've piqued my curiosity.
All right. 11. We're in 11.
We're in 11. And, that really is just so fascinating. All right. 11. Chapter 1. The people took to complaining bitterly before the Lord. They took to doing that. The Lord heard and was incensed. A fire, Ross, of the Lord broke out against them, ravaging. Now, I'm interested in what it says in your Torah tablet. Ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. That place, right, was called Taberah. Now, I have a couple of questions about this.
Yep.
And it's called Taberah because a fire of the Lord had broken out against them. One, is this etiological, the way that Ezra would describe it? That is to say that it's describing something or giving a story as the cause for the reason why it's this place is called this. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the definition. Number 2. Is this similar to when God ate Nadab and Abihu? Like a fire came out from the Lord, from the ark, we're supposed to understand, from the Holy of Holies, and consumed them. Is this what's going on here? Because the people are complaining about.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's the same thing.
It is. It's the same. It's the same way. Same word. It's based on the idea tochal, to eat. Mm-hmm.
It is to eat. So he's eating the people as he did eat Nadab and Abihu. So I guess the fire is coming out from the ark in the Holy of Holies, and then the people are saying, hey, Moses, can he not? And Moses prays to him, and the fire dies down. That place is called Taberah. Any other...
I'm just looking to see... I'm just looking at my notes here. Yeah, it basically, I guess it is, they're looking to trace the etymology of this word. Taberah means burning. And we see that also, and I know you're probably going to the Moses scroll, but we see that particular place in Deuteronomy 9:22.
Yep.
And see, this is, I'm just going to say this, whenever we look at this story in Numbers 11, we have to look at it in association with Deuteronomy 9, and as you and I would do with the Moses scroll as well. But what is it? Does one give information that either compares or contrasts with what we see in Deuteronomy? And I think the answer is always, almost always, yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm ready.
Even though this happened, we don't know initially what they just took to complaining bitterly. We don't know what those complaints were. And Lord Jehovah decides, I'm just going to eat you guys. So he eats a bunch of them, and then the fire dies down at Moses' request. But they continue nevertheless. And in verse 4, it is the riffraff. What do you have in your Torah tablet? The riffraff in their midst. They're saying, look, if only we had meat. Do you remember the fish that we used to? Oh, that fish.
The mixed multitude.
Oh, the cucumbers. You've got mixed multitude, right? Now, I would suggest that the mixed multitude is, in fact, the Levites, those who accompany Israel. But I think here it's attributing it these grumblings or these complaints to those who are not Israel, so that Israel don't have to get blamed. But interestingly, the people took so. Now, it goes on to say, look, we'd really like some meat. We've had it with this manna. Look, we've got nothing but this manna, Ross. Now the manna is like coriander seed, and the color was like this, and the people would go out and they'd grind it and they'd they'd boil it.
Whatever. If you love a certain food, have you ever heard this? That the rabbis would say, whatever if let's say it's butterscotch candy, when you ate your manna, that's what it was. It tasted whatever.
It was like coriander seed, and the color was like this, and it tasted like rich cream. You can't really complain. But there's only some, and you're not going to be on a diet of rich cream.
You can't eat it all every day, man.
You can't do it all day, every day. I can understand you want some fish or chicken in the pot. I don't think it's worth killing people over.
Well, see, there you go. You're saying that you want some fish or chicken, and
I really do.
Well, there are a lot of people who say, and some early ancient groups who said that this is an evidence that God did not want people. You want flesh, Jono? You want bird between your teeth? Is that what you want? Let me tell you something. You better get ready, because you're going to get it. You're not going to just get a little bit. You're going to get it until it comes out of your nostrils. And that's the story.
Here's another thing,
that's what happens, though. Yeah.
What they have is they have manna, which tastes like rich cream coming out of them. They're doing all sorts of things to try and make it a little bit different. Oh, let's boil it in a pot, or we'll make it into cakes, or we'll just have it like this or like that. And eventually they're like, dude, seriously, I'm over mannered. It's coming out my nostrils. Oh, you don't like that? Here's a bunch of quail but for it to come out of your nostrils, you've got to keep eating it. If you keep eating it, surely it's because you're hungry.
You're thinking if they would have just use smaller quantities in either way, they would have been okay.
You're full, Russ. When you've had your quail, it's like, oh, that was good. I'm full now. I'm going to bed. You can't go to bed because there's just more quail and you have to eat it.
Yeah.
Think about the children in Africa. Finish what's on your floor. There's all this quail up to your knees. You've got to eat the quail. Keep eating it.
Look at this, though.
It does make sense.
But I hear you. But look at, let me show you a couple of things. By the way, this is what I'm going to be teaching on this coming Saturday.
Okay.
Now, not just the whatever comes out of your nostrils, but the story. Because get this, now people won't agree with me until they listen to this. Think about this. We've got bread, manna with a description. We've got a lust for the flesh pots that you had in Egypt. We've got these stories that, guess what? It's not just in Numbers chapter 11, Jono. In Exodus chapter 16, there is the same story. And I'm going to actually seek to show that these two narratives will come together. Yes.
I'm glad okay, I was going to ask you about that because, all right, so this is where I'm going. We have a little further on, and you've already mentioned it, we've got the 70 elders, okay? Moses is overwhelmed. He's like, what, am I the mother of these Israelites? Yeah. Can you just kill me? If you're going to start eating people, put me on the list because I'm done. I've had it with them. And then, so Jehovah says to him, all right, look, what I'll do is I'll take some of the spirit that's on you and go get me 70, elders, and I'll put it on them. Now, this is a totally brand new theological concept. We don't have anything like this, except for, now I know you might point to the guys that created the ark, right? And that God puts on them a spirit.
Yeah, Betzalel and Aholiab
and Aholiab. And it is a bit different. This is a little more unique. And what we have, even the term spirit, Ross, I think we only have that maybe 9 times in Genesis, 6 times in Exodus, 3 times in Leviticus, 3 times in Deuteronomy. Here in Numbers, it appears, I think, 12 times. And of those 12 times, half of them are in this passage. And it's all about putting the spirit on the people. But what it actually is, in any case, as unique as it is delegating authority, Moses' authority, spreading it out to alleviate his burden. Okay, fine. But to your point, what we have now, let me just first highlight a verse from the Moses Scroll. The Moses Scroll says, and it is represented in Deuteronomy chapter 9, as you mentioned, the Moses Scroll says, and at Taberah, and at Massah, and at Kibrot Hata'avah, you were rebellious against your Elohim. Well, it just so happens that the first and the last location mentioned in this Moses Scroll verse is mentioned here in Numbers chapter 11, at the beginning and at the end. And the question became in my mind, well, hang on, where is Massah? Why would it mention these two and not Massah, right? It becomes curious. If it's sort of explaining, because we have no explanation in the Moses Scroll for these, of what happened at these locations. Moses just mentions it.
Grumpy Moses, as you call it.
Grumpy he was grumpy. And he said, at these places too, you guys suck, right? Stop it. But here, Numbers wants to say, oh yeah, let me tell you what happened at those places, but it misses Massah. Well, when you look up Massah and you find, where is this place mentioned? Lo and behold, it is in Exodus chapter 17. Well, what precedes Numbers chapter 17? Exodus chapter 17. It is Exodus chapter 16, of course, that you just mentioned. This is the manna. So what we have in Exodus 16 is manna. We have Massah in Exodus 17. And in Exodus chapter 18, what do we have?
The burden of leadership. The
burden of leadership. Yitro is saying,
Yitro.
Yeah, you got it.
Ruel.
That's right. So it's a little bit too coincidental. I don't know how it all fits together. But to your point, you do? I'm looking forward to hearing that. You're going to talk about that on Saturday. All right, grand. Excellent.
Let me just say, this is one of the most fascinating pieces in the journey. So first of all, and I'm loving, because this is one of my passionate points in my research, I love studying the wilderness narratives. And we get in Numbers 33, we get this list of, they went here, they went there, they went here, they went there, they stopped here, they did this. And we have other places in the Pentateuch which also give bits and pieces of a wilderness narrative. Now, if we're to trust the priestly pen, Numbers 33 is the authoritative list. because it basically says, and Moses jotted down all the journeying, the starting points. What is fascinating is to see what's in, what's out. And then when you compare Deuteronomy and you bring in the Moses scroll and you begin to look at these, you find that they don't go together. They disagree on things such as the place where Aaron dies. I mean, that's a pretty big, significant point. So, what I was going to say is that the study coming up on Saturday is to look at, could we possibly have several different narratives that looked at together give us a more clear picture of what sites apply to what narratives, and I think it's quite fascinating, and I think the evidence is substantial. So it's funny, you noticed the same thing I did with the flow. If you've got bread, you've got quail, you've got the place names,
and the
it's
delegation,
unmistakable.
the place names, So it is curious, and the real question in my head is, why are 2 mentioned in chapter 11 here in our Torah portion, and 1 is mentioned back in Exodus chapter 17, but surrounded by these events in 16 and 18, which comport also to chapter 11 here. I don't know how to answer that, so I'm looking forward to your next show. So,
one other point is that I want to bring up, because you brought up this recurrence of the Hebrew ruach. Ruach. Is that what you say? How many times does it appear? It's like
spirit. I think I don't know. What is it? Must be looking at it now.
12,
must be 30
times,
something.
Oh, really?
In numbers, it's 12 times, and half of that appears right here in chapter 11.
Okay, and let me just say that what's interesting is that there's this play on the word ruach, because is it spirit, or is it wind? It's like you want the spirit, see, and the spirit comes on some of these, but guess what happens? They, because of their rebellion and wanting to eat all this quail flesh, the wind, the wind brings in.
Blows
so is it the wind? Is it the spirit? What's going on here?
Flock of quail.
So and they feel like they've got to eat them.
And the strange thing about this, Ross, is, of course, why don't they just eat their flocks? They've got all of these flocks, goats, cattle, and sheep. Why not? It's not like they don't have meat. What is the problem here? So,
let me just say, people don't know, when we talk about a lot of quail, let's look at, let me just make sure, I need the verse. Let me make sure I've got this right. I want you to tell me, because I just, you like the math. How much is a cubit? How deep is a cubit? How tall is a cubit?
Is a cubit like a forearm? Is that like a forearm?
It's 18 inches or whatever.
Yeah, is that right? Let's do that.
So, I mean, I'm using my
foot and a half.
Yeah, 1.5 feet. And then what would that be in metric?
2 cubits deep, so it's 3 feet deep.
3 feet deep.
Cubit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I say knee height. Like, it's going to be over your knees. Well,
your knees. Your knees. It'd be up to my chin. So think about it. You've got
you swimming in quail. And that's why everyone has to eat them, so that you don't drown in quail, Ross.
Yeah, to keep the short people safe.
Got to get these numbers down. Yeah.
So, but I mean, seriously, though, let's look at that. Verse 31. Yeah. There went forth a wind, or a ruach, from Jehovah, and brought quails from the sea, and let them fall by the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and a day's journey on the other side. Now, how far is a day's journey? So we're talking about a distance. Like from the outside of camp, there is a distance of quail, a day's journey, about 2 cubits above the face of the earth. So not only is it a day's journey out,
I never thought about that before. But what you're telling me is that there's like miles of 3 foot deep of quail.
Yeah.
This is why they had to keep eating. They were at risk of being smothered in quail and dying.
The question is, and Jono's laughing, I'm being serious here. This is a lot of quail, and I want people to notice that.
A lot. And this is the reason why this, Ross. So the meat was still between their teeth, not chewed, when the anger of the Lord blazed forth against them. He's eating them again, and struck the people with a severe plague. Oh, he hits them with a plague. That place was named Kibroth Hata'ava, because the people who had the cravings were buried there. Okay, because the plague hit them.
Graves of lusting, I think, is what it's called.
Graves of lusting. And so this is the reason why it's called that. And again, check off one of the locations in that verse of the Moses scroll. Right. Now,
are we done with chapter 11?
Almost. But we're jumping over a verse that we need to highlight, and that is verse 29 for two reasons. Number one is that we finally get out of the priestly material and find ourselves in J in 11 verse 29. But the other thing is that 11 verse 29 asks a very good question. What happens is Jehovah sort of sucks out some of the spirit of Moses and puts it on, 70 other elders and shares the load. And then some of them go into the camp and are prophesying. And Joshua comes to Moses and says, "Oh, these guys are prophesying." And Moses is like, "Well, what? You're upset about that? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his spirit upon them." So now it's his spirit that he's putting upon them. But it does beg the question, Ross, why doesn't he do that? What?
Yeah.
What?
Well, he doesn't.
Why not?
He does. Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he just take some of Moses' spirit or his spirit and just put it on them all? And then everyone's prophesying and everyone's doing the right thing, and then you don't have to bear the load, and everyone is now, their own agency.
I think the proof is in the behavior of the folks, at least according to the priestly writer. I mean, I know that the serious answer is that if God did that, I mean, what would this turn into? I mean, in fact, I think that might be, if we just read the narrative and we see Joshua's response, his reaction, I think that's his point is, hey, the little deal that you did, Moses, where God put some of his spirit. Well, Eldad and Medad are still playing the part, and so Moses is made to say, let's let everybody be a prophet. The interesting thing about that is the priestly writers, all the way up into the latter books of the Bible, we get this image that ultimately that is going to come to pass. That, and I think it's very clear that the writer is showing a connection between what is mentioned here and what is to come, that in the latter days. I mean, it's Joel, that in the latter days this is going to happen, and my spirit and so forth, and the young men and the old men, and dreaming dreams and seeing visions and prophesying and in the meantime, unless you go to a charismatic church, we're not seeing this at all now.
Yeah.
We're not seeing it at all.
Now listen, chapter 12 is a Miriam cluster.
Okay, I've never heard it called that, but I get it.
It's a Miriam cluster. Miriam's name is mentioned, a couple of times in Exodus, 9 times in Numbers, once in Deuteronomy. And of those 9 times in Numbers, 7 of them happen right here in this chapter. Yep. When they were in Hazarot, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman that he had married. He married a Cushite woman. Yep. I've got in inverted commas and an exclamation mark is the way that it's presented here. They said, both of them, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? We're important as well, Ross. We're very important. And look, don't forget, Moses married that Cushite woman. And maybe we're a little bit jealous of their relationship because maybe he talks with her and maybe she sort of helps him out with some stuff. And look, hasn't the Lord spoken through us as well?
And the answer is?
Well, apparently the answer is yes. But I guess at least Aaron is, we're to believe, is very, very important. But we're now are we still in J? I think we're still in J.
Let me bring Ezra in. Go ahead, but I want to bring Ezra in a minute to ask a question. Go ahead.
And the next verse 3, now Moses was a very humble man, more so than any other man on earth. So it's contrasting Miriam and Aaron in their pride, I suppose, with Moses, who was very, very humble, and we're to understand that, well, did he write this?
That's a good question. In fact, that is one of the primary, it's one of the first alerts. We talk about the 10 reasons to blow the trumpet.
One of the more obvious ones. Yeah.
One of the more obvious questions that came up among scholars, particularly in the 19th century, when they began to look at the question of authorship. And that was the point. If Moses is the meekest man or the most humble man in all the earth, would the meekest man, the most humble man in all the earth write? And Moses was the, it's like the old country song, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. I get up and look in the mirror. I get better looking each day. To know me is to love me," and so forth. So this is the idea. Would someone write that? And that's the big question. But speaking of writing, in this particular passage, there is an association between prophecy and dreams. And I'd like to ask Ezra about that, to give us sort of a rundown on the association of prophecy and dreams like we see here in Numbers chapter 12.
Ah, yes. Numbers 11 and 12 are rich ground for unpacking early Israelite ideas of prophecy. We've got two key moments here. First, when the 70 elders receive the Spirit and prophesy, briefly and notably, never again. That's already a strong statement. Prophecy isn't ongoing for everyone. It's episodic, controlled, and divine in origin. Moses then famously says, "Would that all Jehovah's people were prophets," which is dripping with both idealism and irony. He's overwhelmed, the people are complaining, and yet here he imagines a democratization of revelation. Then in Numbers 12, when Miriam and Aaron challenge Moses, ostensibly over the Cushite woman, but really over prophetic authority, God draws a sharp line. Yes, he speaks to prophets through dreams and visions, but Moses, he gets clarity, mouth to mouth, no riddles. That's a textual elevation of Moses to a unique prophetic status, almost pre-Deuteronomistic in flavor. Now, Joel's vision, much later in the prophetic corpus, echoes Moses' longing. "I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams." Joel's channeling that old Mosaic hope into an eschatological future. It's a literary and theological callback, and it reframes what's episodic in Numbers into a vision of widespread divine access. From a documentary perspective, you can feel the tension between centralized, Moses-exclusive prophecy and the more open, charismatic spirit movements that bubbled up in Israel's history. It's not just theological, it's political. Who gets to speak for God? And how many voices does God allow in the room?
So it seems to me, and tell me what you think, it seems like the right of the, and we're out of the priestly material is my understanding. I think we're in J now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there seems to be an awareness of the Joseph narrative, perhaps the Daniel narrative, and there's a great deal in common between the two. And one of the things that I find very frustrating about the Daniel narrative is that dreams that are given to Daniel, or visions that are given to Daniel, dreams really, I guess, even he doesn't understand what they mean. And then an angel comes and says to him, "Let me give you the explanation." And even then we're left wondering what that means. It's too ambiguous, and yet God says, yeah, I'm doing this on purpose. But with Moses, I speak, like he is trusted
clearly
throughout my household. Yeah. With him, I speak mouth to mouth, plainly, and not in riddles. Right. With those other ones, as in dreams and kind of riddles, and it's not really plain. And he beholds the likeness of the Lord, which again is contradictory of other passages that we've already read. How then did you not shrink from speaking against my servant Moses? What are your thoughts?
It's interesting the way this is worded, the way Ezra worded this. I've often thought about, there does seem to be a tension between, it's a play for authority. We see this in the book of Numbers. We see this throughout the Pentateuch. There are challenges which rise from time to time. And it's always about who is ultimately the voice for God. And that we're going to see that more in the battle of the Levites versus the sons of Aaron. We see it in various texts.
Yeah.
So it clearly is a drama unfolding. And it's when you read this story, God basically comes down to the tent and says, "You three get out here." Like he's calling them on the carpet, as we say, and he's going to rake them over the coals and basically challenge on this whole idea of Moses' position.
So Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8 is, I think, perhaps the only, I could be wrong about this, but it might be the only place where God speaks to Aaron directly. And it is directly after he eats his two firstborn sons, which I understand. And Jehovah spoke to Aaron saying, "Drink no one, just going to let you know, don't be drinking on the job." Like, that's an opportune moment to do that right there. And that's the only place where God apparently speaks to Aaron directly. If you know of other places, dear viewers.
No, I was just thinking, is that the only? No, I don't know.
I could be wrong, but I think everywhere else, I think Moses acts as the conduit of God's instruction for Aaron. Jehovah says to Moses, "Speak to Aaron and say to him."
Yeah.
But here it is directly. But what he's saying, Jehovah is saying, look, with Moses, I speak to him face to face. He sees me. We sit there and have a chat together, like two guys, face to face. And it is a power play. It is a challenge of authority. But what is fascinating about this is that Miriam gets punished, and Aaron is standing there, gets off scot-free. What are your thoughts on that?
I tell you, it's really interesting. And what are the punishments about? I mean, I'm not necessarily going to blow everyone's mind with profound meaning, but the different people wonder, why is it? First of all, what is it about the Cushite woman? Some challenge. Some have suggested that a Cushite woman would be very dark-skinned,
Ethiopian. And I think
I think that's the way most people associate. So they associate this with the idea that this Cushite woman was a different race, a different ethnicity, and that Miriam was very critical. And it doesn't say this in the text. I'm just saying, people have argued this, and therefore, she's stricken with this white. You're going to be white. Oh, you don't. You're going to talk about color. Let me give you something to talk about. And then similar,
she becomes ostracized. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she's cast out. It's odd. It's very odd. Very odd.
I'm going to suggest that perhaps that isn't what's going on. I understand that is the speculation of some.
Oh yeah.
But what we have here is a throwback to Leviticus chapter 13. This is the condition that she's come down with, and we don't really know what the condition is, but it's a white, scaly, and she's covered in it. It's a plague that has hit her. And it's gruesome because Aaron says to Moses, this is why, think about this description. Aaron says to Moses, "Oh, my Lord, account not to us the sin which we committed in our folly." He gets off scot-free. She is stricken with this plague. Let her not be, and here's the description, as one dead who emerges from his mother's womb with half his flesh eaten away.
Yeah.
That is gruesome. Like, that is absolutely gruesome. And why is that?
It must have been a pretty scary sight. And by the way, even people who think that she's stricken with this whiteness as a result of her attack on the Cushite woman's darkness, the whole thing about that is people, they know that it's this stricken with this white, scaly whatever, that we don't really know what it is. I mean, it reminds me also of the story. Remember when Moses is preparing to go to the people, as one of the signs, he's going to reach in his cloak and that's going to happen to him.
That's right.
I don't know.
That's exactly right. And I do think that this is a challenge on the relationship that Moses has with his wife. She's in the clique, if you like, and they're jealous. I think they're just jealous. And so it goes on to say, Ross, but the Lord said to Moses, and here's another really odd thing, where to understand that Jehovah is saying to Moses, this is the equivalent of me spitting in her face. This is me spitting in her face. This is what the plague is, I'm spitting in the face. I mean, this is kind of disgusting, really. If her father spat in her face, ew, I mean, who does that anyway? Would she not bear her shame for 7 days, let her be shut out of the camp for 7 days, and let her be then be readmitted? So she is shut out of the camp for 7 days, and the people didn't move until Miriam, came back into the camp, and then they set out from Hazarot and encamped in the wilderness of Paran. We're in the wilderness of Paran again.
By the way, all of these details are important. Shutting out this many days in the camp to figure out the calendar and what year and what month and what day. I mean, some of this is fun to track as we work our way through. But I wanted to comment on spitting in the face. There's one other text where this shows up. Do you remember off the top of your head where it is?
No.
Okay.
No.
So if you look at Deuteronomy 25:9, it says, his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders and put his sandal off his foot and spit in his face. And she shall answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. Now, I don't know if these two are in any way connected, but could this be applied something? Remember, because in Numbers, it talks about he's faithful in all my house.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is Levirate marriage, right? This is if a man will not fulfill his duty in Levirate marriage, then she is to go up and pull sandal off his foot and then spit in his face. Okay, keep going. Sure.
It's a weird story. Both of these are weird stories, and they obviously are traced back, according to the priestly pen, to some ancient ritual that has to do with something we no longer understand. And I know commentators have said they understand it.
So it's perhaps an expression of shame on you, if you like, spitting in one's face.
Let's ask Ezra if he knows anything about this thing.
Let's do it.
Good catch. And yes, that phrase about spitting in the face definitely raises eyebrows, both literarily and ritually. In Numbers 12, when God defends Moses and Miriam is struck with tzara'at, he says, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? That's invoking a cultural symbol of deep public shame, likely familial dishonor, even if no physical act happened. Now, in Deuteronomy 25, during the Chalitza, the Levirate shoe removal ceremony, if the brother-in-law refuses to marry the widow, she spits in his face. There, it's more legal than emotional, but still a deliberate act of public disgrace. So in both cases, spitting signals dishonor, rejection, and social shame, but in opposite directions and contexts. Divine familial in Numbers, civic legal in Deuteronomy. Are they connected? Some scholars argue they share a common cultural motif rather than a direct literary dependency. Both come from ancient honor-shame frameworks that governed much of Israelite life. The act of spitting in the face may not be literal, but it signals rejection so severe that it demands social consequences. Quarantine for Miriam, loss of public respect for the refusing brother-in-law. So while there's no direct textual link between the two, no shared source tradition necessarily, they both tap into the same symbolic language of shame and status within the community. It's a great example of how law, narrative, and metaphor overlap in the biblical world.
So it does remind me, Ross, also of Ruth, of course, where Boaz meets at the gate with the other close relative and who is closer and should be taking up that responsibility in Levirate marriage, and he refuses to take it up, which is great for Boaz because he wants to marry Ruth, and that's fine. But there is the shoe removal. I don't think Boaz spits in his face. At least we don't. We don't have that there. Curious though, isn't it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, just strange. Hey, all right, so look, here, have you ever had anybody, and look, I know that a lot of people do pray for other people, and sometimes these prayers are quite lengthy, and, this, I always think about this when someone says to pray for them. Moses, we have a Moses prayer. This would be a great little book. I don't know if you remember, years ago in the Christian community, I think I'm saying this right, there was a book called The Prayer of Jabez, and it was a very, very short prayer. It's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, and it was put out by a Christian author, and it went crazy. It was just a little bitty book, because it was talking about, how you pray. And here's a biblical example. Great idea. Maybe I need to read that book again. But this,
so
I
the
think,
example
is
you're citing is verse 13?
Yeah, exactly. And listen, it's quite short. Moses cried to the Lord, "Oh God, please heal her, please." In Hebrew, El na Rapha na la. Very short. So when people say, "Hey, would you pray for someone?" I mean, at least this is the way I always talk about this as the prayer of Moses. In this example. So interesting.
I like that. That's a good place to leave it. All right, so we are done with our Torah portion. We're going to be kicking off this time next week with Beha'alotecha from chapter 13 to the end of chapter 15. And Ross, there's an enormous amount of Moses Scroll connections in this one. I've been waiting for this one. This is going to be fun. Looking forward to it.
Good deal.
All right. Have a good week, dear viewers. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And until then, enjoy. Ezra, take us on out.
Well, folks, that wraps up our journey through Beha'alotecha, from fiery quail to prophetic dreams, from cloud-guided camping trips to a divine rebuke that turned Miriam pale as snow. We've seen just how textured and theologically packed this portion is. Remember, what looks like wandering is often where the deepest shaping happens. If you enjoyed this episode of Torah Pearls, do us a favor, like it, share it with your fellow Bible buffs, and invite someone along for the next portion. Whether you're a seasoned scholar or just Torah curious, there's always room in the camp. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and as always, may your wilderness be full of wonder.